grew up around Minneapolis area and a few other places throughout the Second World War, but otherwise, basically it was west of Minneapolis. Well, I guess they probably weren't happy about me getting drafted, but I was working with my dad at the time, so what needed to be done had to do it. So my folks drove me to Minneapolis to drop me off at the armory. So, and that's where they swore me in. And then they gave me to be back in the morning to go somewhere. So I went back home again. Then I had to come back in the morning and got on a bus to ride to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, by Chicago. Then we had another long bus ride to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Well, it was vigorous, but I was in a good physical condition, so it was interesting, and learning to use the weapons, which I was used to hunting with guns anyway, so that was interesting too. One specific thing happened we were in a movie theater watching a movie, and they interrupted the movie to announce that the Korean War was over. There was a big roar. I got through with that. I got on a plane. They flew me to D.C. to be at Fort Belvoir, Virginia for schooling. Well, I went to school to become a heating and ventilation expert. Then I got through there. I got orders to go to Port Louis, Washington, but they gave us money to fly there. We had 2 weeks to do it, so luckily it went right through Minneapolis where my folks are, so I stayed home for numerous days. From Fort Louis at the day after Thanksgiving, which they always have a big meal on holidays, I got on a ship and spent 2 weeks to get to Yokohama, Japan. I was under General Black, and it had civilians on it too. That one, it was women and children whose husbands were in Japan in the military. So they had good lodging. Ours was a strictly troop ship where you had a canvas bunks layered several high, and they're close together, so if you roll over, you hit the other guy's butt. So, and there was a lot of seasickness. Not me, but I had an experience, so had a guard duty up there one night, it was afternoon, and it was by the civilians to keep the other guys out of there. And to my surprise, a flying fish came up and landed on the deck. And the crew had never seen that happen before. So I got to Japan, and I went to Camp Drake outside of Tokyo. And I had Christmas dinner there, and next got on a train and went down to Sasebo, Japan, way down south. And I had New Year's dinner there, and the next day overnight to Busan, Korea, where I spent the rest of my 16 months there with I was assigned to A Company of the 434th Engineer Battalion, construction engineers. We did all kinds of outdoor construction, building towers for water towers and digging ditches, and but after 6 months I got an offer to be in the mess hall, which I took them up on because it's much nicer duty, because you went in at noon to help serve the meal, then you fix supper, and you come back in the morning and make breakfast and fix dinner, then you're off again for another cycle. We had better duty and no outside cold and wet, and it worked out fine. I was the first cook for 6 months, so. And I made it to corporal. That's as far as I got. So my time ran out, and I got on a train that went up to Incheon, Korea. We got on a ship, and that was the General Black. It's a smaller one even, with 3,000 troops in there. And it took 3 weeks to get to Oakland Army Base. And then from then I took they put us on a train and went back to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and they checked us out and gave us $400 in cash and said, "You're free to find your way home." Luckily, some other guys from Minnesota had hitchhiked home and came back with a car. So I got a ride home. We did a variety of stuff. One big project they had was old big buildings that were quite large that the Japanese had put up, and they wanted to convert it into a hospital system. So I worked on piping there and stuff. And we had a water tower there that was 25,000 gallon on a 25-foot tower, and I got to put the 4-inch piping all the way to the top and then out of the bottom too. So I got to do some of my kind of work that I knew, but otherwise we replaced planks on bridges and dug ditches and just clean up along the roads. And happened to be one man from Minnesota that was in a mess hall with me too, so I got to see him after we were out of the Army, him and his family, because they weren't too far away from where I lived. But otherwise, they just learned to get along with different individuals. Luckily, there we had Korean help, so they did the KP work, like washing all the dishes and peeling the potatoes, because we sometimes had to help to get it done too, because we had a 100-pound bag to peel for a meal, and then we had stoves that were gasoline fired. They're called field stoves, actually. And we had one Korean that was in charge of the stove, so which was very helpful. So we had basically the cooking to do, and then we had one Korean that was the baker that would bake things for us too. So, well, I guess working in the mess hall was the best part, because we could have the time off, and sometimes we'd go wandering around, and one time we borrowed some shotguns and went hunting and shot a pheasant, which was fun. In order to get mail, you had to write mail, so you'd write letters. And the Army was generous, and we got a free mail no stamps. So just have to write up in the corner where you work, your outfit, and which was extra little thing they gave us. I had a car ride with other guys back to my home, and I went back to work with my dad as a plumber, and went and bought a nice new 1955 Ford Fairlane, which was pretty nice to have a new car. I met my wife the next year in '56. She was working in a hospital as a nurse, and my mother was a patient. And I had a cousin that was a head nurse up on another floor, but what happened, that was my mother's birthday. I made her a birthday cake and brought coffee, and we had coffee, and I asked my cousin to come down after their shift. Well, she brought down two nice young nurses, and they would walk home, so I gave them a ride home. And I went to my cousins to have an evening meal with them, and they gave me my future wife's phone number. I called her up and took her out that night, and from then on it went. So we got married in June 1st of '57. I was glad I had the opportunity to do it because it's part of our country, and we have to do what's necessary. And I'm just fortunate that I was in a good place and safe. And this is just me over in Korea when I grew a mustache. And these are our two from in our mess hall with our officers and the other cooks.